Well, thank you, Dick, for that wonderful introduction. It's longer than my talk. And I've actually been to 86 countries, if you count Utah.
I blew it.
And you might think that it's a little bit prestigious to be the last keynote speaker, but it's the only time that I was available. I wanted to go on Thursday morning, but I was actually working on a trip with Smithsonian to Zion and Bryce. And I got to echo something that Brad said many years ago. They just don't make clients like they used to. And I think the internet has something to do with it because people don't retain information like they used to. And I've had a couple of really odd moments when I've been speaking on the microphone on a coach or on a river trip or something like that, and I just realize I'm talking to people about things that happened millions of years ago. Why would they even care, let alone remember it? And part of the reason is I am very passionate about sharing geology. I just don't think that people are passionate about hearing it as much as they used to. But I'm going to give it a try tonight. I'm going to talk about this strange and twisted path that the Colorado River has taken through time. And that's the name of the title of my talk tonight, Going with the Flow, the strange and twisted path of the Colorado River through time. And it certainly has had a twisted path. And I want to caution you, don't try to remember much of this at all. Just sit back and listen to it and enjoy it because it's a very convoluted story. Some aspects of it are still not well accepted by everybody, and there's still debate that goes on. But what I've done tonight is I've crafted a bit of a talk that will allow you to understand some of the major new things that we do understand about the Colorado River. So the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon was really instrumental in letting people know that rivers have evolutionary histories. And there was a time not too long ago when people looked at the earth and they thought that everything that they see had been there forever, since the days of Adam and Eve. And in the attempt to understand how the Colorado River carved the Grand Canyon, some very fundamental things were understood. For example, John Strong Newberry, the first geologist to lay eyes on the Grand Canyon, he came up with the idea that the river carved the landscape. And that sounds very simple today, but most people who would have looked at it in 1857 would have thought that that was a rift that the river later occupied. And for him to look at that, those few days that he was on the South Rim, and realize that the river had carved the canyon was revolutionary for its day, and he came up with the subdiscipline called fluvialism. So through time, rivers are born, they're altered, and eventually they die. And thank goodness the Colorado River is just in the middle of its history, and it's not going to die anytime soon. So when we talk about the Colorado River, we also have to talk about its ancestors, because it has evolved quite a bit. And when we talk about the ancestors, the first thing we can say for sure is that the river can be no older than 70 million years. And you'll notice that abbreviation up there, capital M, small a, that stands for mega annum, and that will keep me on these slides from having to spell out millions of years ago. MA stands for that. Interestingly enough, the initial ancestors flowed to the northeast, exactly the opposite direction that the river goes today. Now, there may not be any one-to-one connection between its original ancestors and the river we have today, but certainly they did play into the story. These ancestors disappear beginning about 30 million years ago. We sort of lose sight of them. There's no more sediment. This is one of the most confusing parts about the history of the river, is that it does disappear from our view, and it's not seen again until you talk about the upper river upstream from Grand Junction, Colorado, at 11 million years ago, and for the lower river below Grand Canyon at 5 million years ago. So a big gap in the rock record, a big gap in our understanding of what had gone on. And the lower Colorado River can be no older than 4 or 5 million years. And there's been a lot of recent research done in the area below Hoover Dam to help us understand this part of it. So a long time ago, before there was a Colorado River, there was the area of the Colorado Plateau. And this is the giant stack of rocks that we have. Shown on the screen here are the rocks that are visible within the Grand Canyon, and everything above that red line there has already been eroded away off of the Grand Canyon. Some of those rocks are right here in Kanab, and things like the Moenavi Formation and the Kayenta and the Navajo Sandstone. Not too far away is Zion Canyon, and below Zion Canyon, the Grand Canyon rocks are still in the subsurface, but the rocks that sit above the Carmel Formation have been eroded away from that as well. And finally, the area near Bryce Canyon, we can see that the rocks are still in the subsurface there and the ones that are present on the surface. And yes, what this does mean that if you're standing on the rim of Bryce Canyon at 8,000 feet, the Vishnu schist in the subsurface must be at least a mile or 8,000 feet below sea level at Bryce Canyon. So these rocks are dipping to the north, and they're still buried very, very deeply. And the reason I even said anything about that is because in this 15,000-foot section of rock, there are a number of various strata that record these long-gone river systems, none of them which are related to the Colorado River as we know it. And I'm just highlighting them there in purple. And those are river deposits. And those river deposits are from rivers, sometimes larger than the Colorado River, sometimes smaller, but they have no bearing to the modern river. And these are some scenes that I stole from the web, obviously. Look at this. This is from the Silurian, some 400 or 375 million years ago, and this must have been a strange river to run. So I'm going to show you a few of these paleogeographic maps. This is a paleogeographic map from 500 million years ago, and we can see that there were rivers that ran to the west, and that light blue and those whitish colors are where the shoreline was. You can see the four corner states right there. And the evidence for this would come from a rock unit known as the Tapete Sandstone, visible in the bottom of the Grand Canyon or in the Lador Formation up in Dinosaur National Monument. We had rivers that also went to the northwest. This would be during the Moenkopi and Chin-Lee times, and you can see that these sluggish rivers were coursing across to the northwest direction, leaving behind things like the colorful Chin-Lee Formation with all of its petrified logs. That also is a river deposit. Curiously, in this big stack of rocks, we find evidence for strata that have no bearing to rivers. And this would be when river systems were buried or negated. And you can see all of the sand dunes that were covering the Colorado Plateau. And yes, this is the Navajo Sandstone. This is not a modern dune. I just love this outcrop in the Coyote Buttes because what you can see here are the cross beds. These are the avalanche cross beds that cascade down from the crest of the dune. And then when that dune was sitting there, the wind would blow around and leave these little wisps of sand on the backside of the dune. A lot of details preserved in these rocks. But to get to the Colorado River, we have this river system that began about 110 million years ago with rivers going to the north, going into what is going to become the Great Interior Seaway or the Western Interior Seaway. And I'll show you a couple of these images right here. This is 105 million years ago, and you can see the sea is starting to come in, and this is the maximum extent of the sea right there, leaving behind these types of deposits, which can be seen in the Book Cliffs, in Black Mesa, and in other areas of the Colorado Plateau. And then the sea begins to recede back to the east and back to the south. And what I want you to notice is this nascent river system that is present on the Colorado Plateau at about 70 million years ago. And this could be considered the start of the Colorado River or its ancestors. And this would be the evidence for it flowing in the opposite direction. Let's just have those rivers going across the landscape right there. No Rocky Mountains at this time. Nothing to block that river. And what that means is that the initial strata that were eroded off of the Colorado Plateau probably made their way to the Mississippi system and into the Gulf of Mexico. And that would have been possible for about 5 million years after the seaway had retreated and before the Rockies came up. Because at 65 million years ago is when the Rockies did pop up, and you can see that they're starting to block that northeast direction of flow. Now, I have to tell you, none of this is controversial amongst any geologists. There are many lines of evidence that we use to say that the rivers went in this direction. We can look at gravels that are left on the landscape. We can look at the bedding textures that are within the rocks, and they tell us that the rivers were going there. One of the best things you can use is that if you see that there were rocks that were exposed down here in southern Arizona, if you find a little piece of gravel of it up there, it can tell you that it had a connection to that place. Well, once the Rocky Mountains did start to pop up, what they did is they created a system of freshwater lakes, and these northeast flowing streams began to feed into this lake system. And this lake system existed for a few tens of millions of years. Certainly on much of the Colorado Plateau, we did have rivers that were going in that direction, but we have lake deposits. And there's one in particular, this one arm of that old river has been given the name the California River because it has its headwaters in California, and it went to these freshwater lakes. Now, there's two different California rivers, depending on which researcher you want to associate yourself with. But you'll notice these 3 yellow triangles here. This was a source area for a mineral called zirconium. And these zircon crystals can be eroded from granite. They're very durable, and they can travel long distances, and you can date them radiometrically. And where these things ended up was in a rock unit called the Colton Formation, signified by those blue triangles there. And the Colton Formation can be found in Desolation Canyon along the Green River. These freshwater lakes are evidenced by the rocks at Fossil Butte, and many of you have seen these in the rock shops across the west, these fossil fish that died catastrophically in these lakes. And there's the California River. Now, Bill Dickinson, who first proposed the name California River, did not have any particular location for the river. The only thing he said is that it went from the eastern Mojave into the area of Desolation Canyon. There's the source area in the eastern Mojave, and there's the deposition center looking at the Colton Formation in Desolation Canyon. There was another worker who did say that there was a California River, but Brian Wernicke believed that the California River actually was in the Grand Canyon that we see today. And you may recognize that familiar outline right there. Brian Wernicke believed that the Grand Canyon was carved about 60 million years ago by a California river that went the opposite way. I would imagine that he's going to back away from this idea pretty quick and just go into an idea that the California River could be anywhere, but he did publish that work in 2014. Andrei Potochnik also published on the Paleo Salt River, which did go in the opposite direction and maybe headed to the Western Interior Seaway across into New Mexico. Now, when it comes to the Grand Canyon area, we do have some old deposits. This is in Milkweed Canyon in western Grand Canyon. It's on Wallapai Indian lands. And you can see that orange gravel that the geologists are looking at right there. There is an old canyon system that is within the Grand Canyon that the Colorado River has not completely occupied. And if we look at another outcrop of this particular deposit, I just want to show you, this deposit, by the way, has been dated at 50 to 60 million years old. That's not controversial. But I want to show you what it's sitting in. There is the Muav limestone, and there is the Bright Angel Shale. So we are well deep inside the Grand Canyon. We're almost down to the Vishnu schist, and this deposit, called the Hindu Fanglomerate, is sitting in this hole in the ground. You can't put that gravel there if the canyon was not there to begin with. And this is probably the best evidence that at least part of the Grand Canyon and part of the Colorado River and its ancestors is 50 to 60 million years old. You just can't put that gravel there if the hole is not there. So this is some evidence for the river and its ancestors being old in the Grand Canyon area. When we start to lose sight of the Colorado River and its ancestors is between about 33 and 27 million years ago. And this orange area here represents a gigantic sand dune that probably was blocked by the erupting San Juan volcanic mountains. If you've ever been to the San Juan Mountains in southwest Colorado, it's beautiful scenery, but a lot of that records a very explosive volcanic event that may have blocked the winds from the west and caused the deposit of about 1,500 feet of sand right across the Colorado Plateau. This could have neutralized any drainage system that might have been extant at that time. And so we have to ask the question if sand dunes did bury an early phase of the Colorado River. I know it doesn't look like much from this little outcrop, but there's the Chuska sandstone in the Lukachukai Mountains of Arizona. It is as much as 1,500 feet thick, and that's just the amount that's preserved. So we don't really know how much sand there might have been there originally, but the deposits are found between Albuquerque and northeast Arizona. And then here's Engineer Peak on the highway between Durango and Silverton, and the top part of that mountain there is composed of this volcanic material that likely helped to block the winds that might have been blowing towards the east. So we finally get sight of the river once again in its upper portion above Grand Junction, Colorado. And the modern upper river reappears at about 11 million years ago. And this is a photograph of Grand Mesa looking to the west. And what we have on Grand Mesa is a cap of basalt rock, and underneath it is unmistakable Colorado River gravel. And that basalt cap is dated at about 11 million years, meaning that the river gravel underneath it has to be older than that. And the class, or the rock types that are in that gravel, come from the modern tributaries of the Colorado River in the Sawatch Range and the Elk Mountains and other mountain ranges that are present in Colorado. So what this does is it establishes the modern upper river in the exact location that we see it today, and fortuitously, those basalt lava flows have helped to preserve it. So if we look at the drainage area of the upper Colorado River, we can see that the river was going about as far as Grand Junction, and we know that it has to be older than 11 million years. What it did after that is not known, but some people have postulated that maybe it might have gone up into the Snake River system. There's no evidence for that, except maybe if you look at some species of fish between the Snake River and the Colorado River system that seem to have some distant connection. However, some people have postulated that, but we just really don't know what it did past Grand Junction. The fact is that the upper river was in existence at that time. If we turn our direction now to the area just below the Grand Canyon, we can see that there are sediments beneath the Grand Wash Cliffs. This is a photo I took in 1987 when the Meade Reservoir actually had water in it in this particular place. Lake Meade backed up into the Grand Canyon about 35 miles when it was full. That's all dry ground now there, and the river is flowing on top of the reservoir's old deposits. But these sediments beneath the Grand Wash Cliffs give us an age for the river in this particular spot. And the Grand Wash Cliffs were formed by faulting this long line of cliffs. When the Earth's crust was being pulled apart, all those rocks you see in the cliff as they would have extended out to the right side of the photograph were faulted down. This might be a better view of it. This is a view to the north. There's the Grand Wash Cliffs with the red line denoting the Kaibab limestone in place. And then on Wheeler Ridge, you can see the Kaibab limestone as it's faulted down. By the way, the movement on that fault is 18,000 feet or 3.5 miles. When the Earth's crust was pulled apart and stretched, that block on Wheeler Ridge was faulted down. These sediments washed in from the west. They have no Colorado River gravel in them. And that means that the Colorado River at the foot of the Grand Wash Cliffs can be no older than 6 million years. I've got one more view of the faulted area. You can see all of the Grand Canyon rocks faulted as a steep angle there. And then here's the sediments that exist beneath the Grand Wash Cliffs. And again, they are as young as 6 million years with no Colorado River gravel in them. This precludes the river from being older than 6 million years here. So the river was not exiting the cliffs at 6 million years ago. It could have been going somewhere else and possibly through the Grand Canyon. However, it was not coming to this spot. So what are we left with? We're left with a lower river that's no older than 6, but an upper river that's older than 11. And of course, the big question is, how do you connect these two? In 1964, there was the very first symposium held to answer this question. It was the burning question of the day. How did the Colorado River come into being? And so looking at this digital elevation map of the entire Grand Canyon, Eddie McKee came up with a novel idea called headward erosion and stream piracy to connect the two parts of the river. If we want to create the Grand Canyon, the first thing we have to do is get rid of it. And so through the magic of PowerPoint there, I just erased the Grand Canyon to prior than 6 million years ago. And what Eddie McKee proposed is that there might have been 2 rivers that existed prior to 6 million years ago. And he thought that the ancestral upper river came down like that, essentially the Marble Canyon section that we're familiar with today, and then took a course along the Little Colorado River, eventually going into Lake Bittahoche or possibly even across what is now the Continental Divide into the Gulf of Mexico. And then there was the ancestral lower river flowing in the course that it has today. And the one thing I want you to notice is that there is no connection between the two. Well, this was a steeper gradient river making its way to the Gulf of California. And what he proposed is that steep gradient rivers always want to lower their gradient. And the way they do that is to lengthen their channel. So if you watch this area right here, which is in the vicinity of Grand Canyon Village, you'll see that lower river extending its reach into the upper river and capturing it right at the spot where we have the confluence of the Little Colorado River today. Only after the rivers became integrated did the river start to flow with its full force through the Grand Canyon and achieve its incredible depth. Because now with water from the Rocky Mountains coming through the Grand Canyon, now it had the erosive power to carve the canyon. Only about 15 years after he presented that theory, it was noted that that ancestral upper river could not have gone over the Continental Divide. So a number of geologists, including myself, wondered if maybe he had the idea right, but maybe the ancestral upper river went the other way. And so with the ancestral lower river in place, maybe his idea was good, but maybe the ancestral upper river went the other way. And of course, this would play into a number of different other theories. And what we would do then is we would have something in the vicinity where the Powell Reservoir is today, informally called Glen Lake. Now, there's no deposits that would suggest there was a lake in the Glen Canyon region. However, I will also tell you that any other theory that a geologist has come up with on where the river went, there also are no other deposits for that. So you can't argue that there's no deposits, therefore it can't happen. It is interesting to note that many of these rivers that we see today would go into Glen Lake, including the San Juan and the Gunnison and the Green River. And the Glen Canyon area does seem to be kind of a bullseye, even today with the modern drainages. And it's possible that this is why the upper river can be older than 11 million, but the lower river is not. Just very quickly about the lower river, there's been some exciting work done on the lower river. I've got this map here of the Colorado River corridor without the river on it. There's Las Vegas for reference, Needles, California, Parker, Arizona, and Blythe, California. And it's pretty well understood now by geologists that this lower river came into existence only 4 to 5 million years ago. And the evidence used is a similar sequence of deposits found in 4 separate basins. And the basins are named right there. They're separated curiously by bedrock divides, and that these basins may have sequentially filled in the following order. We had alluvial fans from the enclosing mountains, and then we had coarse gravel that was washed in only from these narrow divides. They sit on top of the alluvial fan deposits. We have lake deposits, which are known as the Bouse Formation in Arizona. And then finally, on top of it all is unmistakable Colorado River gravel. And all 4 basins contain this sequence of rocks. And it's very, very curious. If you're not gambling in Laughlin, Nevada, you might look at the river and see this outcrop right there. And that lower part of it is the debris that came from the alluvial fans right into the basin. And then sitting on top of that is the bedrock debris. Right where the river today goes through these narrow necks, the rock type that is there is found in that layer of deposit. And then finally at the very top, we can see lake deposits. And in this particular view, there are no Colorado River gravels. They've been eroded off the top. Here's what the Bouse Formation looks like up close. It's a fine-grained limestone and chalk. And this could have been from a basin that was completely closed off to the sea. This is a photograph of the gravel debris from the bedrock divides, mostly granite. But if you go to the places today where these bedrock divides would have existed, that's the rock type you see in place. It's very, very curious that where we have put these major dams today is the narrow spots where these bedrock divides were. And Hoover Dam is the best example of that. This would have been the divide that contained the Las Vegas basin to the north of it. And downstream, we can see Parker Dam. This is another one of the places where the rocks pinch in close against the river. That's why it's a good place to put a dam. There probably was a natural bedrock dam there. By the way, before 9/11, above Hoover Dam, some of you may know on the Arizona side, there's an old defensive fortification that overlooks the dam, because we were afraid that the Japanese were going to torpedo the dam. And before 9/11, you could hop over the fence and go up to these outcrops. And these are actual potholes from the Colorado River with gravel deposits in here that have red wall limestone class. This is 700 feet above the base of Hoover Dam. And it's interesting to see that these Colorado River features are still there. So let's just look at this, how this would have worked. Again, here's this map, Las Vegas, Needles, Parker, and Blythe. And the first thing that happens beginning about 5 million years ago is that for some reason, water begins to arrive from the Grand Canyon, hits a bedrock divide, and then fills with water. This is the Las Vegas Basin. And then once that basin fills with water, the lake water starts to spill over the dam and begin to erode it, such that the dam is destroyed, the lake is drained, and then the river goes down to the next one where Davis Dam is located, curiously today, and a basin is formed there with a lake in it. Same thing happens again. The reservoir fills with water, spills over the top and destroys the dam, and then it comes to the next one where Parker Dam is and fills in the Mojave Valley. And one last time, the water starts to spill over the top, it destroys the dam, heads on down and creates the largest of the 4 lakes, which goes all the way out to the west near Amboy, California. And voila, there is the lower Colorado River. And the lower Colorado River is born from closed basin spillover. By the way, it was Elliot Blackwalder who first proposed that this scenario would happen, but he didn't have any of the detailed information. And that leaves us with the river we have today, the present drainage to the southwest. Water comes out of the Rocky Mountains, goes across the Colorado Plateau. The Salt and Gila rivers contribute water, and we have the modern Colorado River. So when you go to the national park at Grand Canyon and they tell you that the Grand Canyon is 5 to 6 million years old, what they don't tell you is that that date specifically refers to the birth of the Colorado River. And as we have seen, some of the Grand Canyon, some of the other canyons across the plateau could have been created by ancestors prior to 4 to 5 million years old. So I'm trying to get them to say when people come into the park, the Colorado River is 4 to 6 million years old. How do you also explain that parts of the Grand Canyon are old and parts of it are young? Carl Karlstrom wrote a paper in 2014 that spoke about how the formation of the canyon was made through the integration of pre-existing paleocanyons. And this is really a good piece of work that shows that different parts of the canyon are different ages. And so if we look back at our digital elevation map, we can look to the area where the Hindu Fanglomerate is found. And we can see that in that area right there, that is between 70 and 50 million years old. This is the part that parallels the Hurricane Fault. And that part of the Grand Canyon may have been carved all that long time ago. The main part of the park, where most of the hotels are located, looks to be between 25 and 15 million years old, based on the way that apatite grains in the sandstones are dated. In other words, these apatite grains are buried, and as rocks are removed off the top of the buried grains, their temperature cools down. And when the temperature cools down, it can be recorded in the apatite grains, and so that's where that date comes from. And then those two widely separated in ages segments to the Grand Canyon are then connected by some younger sections, the Lower Granite Gorge, the Muav Gorge, and Marble Canyon, and those sections would be less than 6 million years old. And this is one way you could have the Grand Canyon being old with other parts of it being young. So in conclusion, the Colorado River and its ancestors, just remember that rivers have evolutionary histories. They're not static upon the landscape. They do change and respond to uplift and climate and stream piracy. Initially, the Colorado River ancestors flowed to the northeast. They disappeared between 30 and 11 million years ago, and so far there's been nothing to say about this enigmatic part. I doubt if any deposits will be found, but maybe some new techniques could squeeze this information out. The upper river is in place by 11 million years ago from its headwaters down to Grand Junction, and the lower river is formed between about 4 and 6 million years ago. And I do have one other little thing. I thought that since this is the last talk for this wonderful symposium, that I would show you a little bit of photographs from the whole length of the Colorado River. But before I do that, I just thought it would be nice to recognize Dave Mortensen, who has done a stellar job of putting this all together. And Dave is in the back there with his wife, Pam. And Dave, I think we should all give Dave a standing ovation for putting this on. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. And let's just look at the river as it exists today.
Long live the Colorado River.